The Untold Legacy, Discovering the Giant Brothers of Goliath. Have you ever wondered what happened after David's legendary victory over Goliath? Did the story truly end when the mighty Philistine champion fell to the ground? Or was this merely the beginning of a more extensive saga of vengeance and epic battles? While most people know the famous tale of the shepherd boy who defeated a giant with nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones, few are aware of the dark secret that lurked in the shadows. Goliath wasn't alone. He had 5 giant brothers of the same bloodline, each one thirsting for revenge against the man who slew their kin. Welcome to a journey into one of the Bible's most fascinating yet overlooked mysteries. Today, we dive deep into ancient texts to uncover the hidden history of Goliath's 5 giant brothers, formidable warriors of the Rephaim race, whose existence has been obscured by time and selective storytelling. What you're about to discover is not commonly taught in religious education, yet it's faithfully recorded in the sacred scriptures. To understand this epic saga, we must first revisit the iconic confrontation that started it all. The setting, the Valley of Elah, where 2 armies faced each other across a ravine. The Philistines, with their champion Goliath of Gath, challenged the Israelites to settle the conflict through single combat. Standing approximately 9 to 10 feet tall, about 6 cubits in a span, according to the biblical text, Goliath was an intimidating figure clad in bronze armor, weighing 5,000 shekels, with a spear whose iron point alone weighed 600 shekels. For 40 days, this behemoth taunted the Israelite army until a young shepherd named David accepted the challenge. Against all odds, David confronted the giant without traditional armor, armed only with his shepherd's staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones from the brook. With remarkable precision, he launched a stone that struck Goliath in the forehead, bringing the mighty warrior crashing to the ground. David then used Goliath's own sword to behead him, sealing a victory that would echo through the ages. But here's where our story takes an unexpected turn. A detail overlooked by most casual readers of Scripture. Why did David collect 5 stones when he needed only 1 to defeat Goliath? Some scholars suggest it was simply prudence, but others point to a more chilling possibility. David knew about Goliath's brothers. According to biblical records scattered throughout Samuel and Chronicles, Goliath had 5 brothers of the same giant race, each formidable in his own right. These weren't merely tall men. They were descendants of the ancient Rephaim, a mysterious race of giants mentioned in various parts of the Bible. After Goliath's defeat, these brothers united with one singular, burning purpose: to hunt down and destroy the man who had humiliated their family and brought their champion low. Their vendetta against David would spark a series of epic confrontations that would test the courage and skill of Israel's greatest warriors. As we prepare to meet each of these formidable adversaries, ask yourself, if it took divine intervention for David to defeat 1 giant, what kind of power would be needed to overcome 5 more? And could there be an even darker secret lurking behind the biblical text? Perhaps even a 6th brother whose existence remains hidden to this day. Join me as we peel back the layers of history to reveal what they never tell you about the giant brothers of Goliath. Blood of giants, the mysterious origins of the Rephaim. To understand the 5 brothers of Goliath, we must first delve into their mysterious bloodline, the enigmatic race known as the Rephaim. Unlike ordinary humans, the Rephaim were beings of extraordinary stature and might, whose origins have been debated by biblical scholars for centuries. The word Rephaim itself provides our first clue. In ancient Hebrew, it carries the dual meaning of the dead ones and the giants, suggesting something both powerful and unnatural about their existence. According to ancient biblical texts, particularly those found in Genesis and the Book of Enoch, the Rephaim may have descended from the Nephilim, beings born from the union of celestial entities called sons of God and human women before the Great Flood. While mainstream religious teaching often glosses over these passages, Deuteronomy 2:20-21 explicitly identifies them. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Ammonites call them Zamzummims, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. These references provide tantalizing glimpses into a prehistory populated by beings of superhuman proportion. Archaeological evidence, though contested, adds another layer to this mystery. Throughout the Middle East, there have been reported discoveries of oversized ancient weapons and armor that would be impractical for normal-sized humans to wield. In 1950, archaeologists working near the ancient city of Gath uncovered a fragment of an enormous bronze spearhead with unusual metallurgical properties. While mainstream archaeology tends to dismiss such findings, they align eerily with biblical descriptions of the weapons carried by the Rephaim giants. What made the Rephaim truly fearsome wasn't merely their size, though that was impressive enough. Biblical accounts suggest they stood between 9 and 15 feet tall, with massive body frames measuring around 6.5 feet across. Their physical strength was legendary, capable of uprooting young trees for use as clubs or hurling boulders that ordinary men could barely lift. The most famous example of Rephaim might was King Og of Bashan, whose iron bed measured approximately 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide, Deuteronomy 3:11, suggesting he required a specially constructed sleeping place to support his enormous frame. But perhaps most intriguing are the linguistic connections that link the Rephaim to other giant races mentioned throughout ancient Near Eastern texts. The Anakim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, all appear to be branches of the same extraordinary lineage. These connections stretch beyond Hebrew texts into Ugaritic literature, where the term Arp-un refers to deified ancestral spirits of great power. This cross-cultural attestation suggests we're dealing not with mere mythological exaggeration, but with dim cultural memories of actual beings whose existence predated conventional history. Yet despite their power, the Rephaim seem destined for extinction. A peculiar pattern emerges in biblical accounts. Wherever the Israelites encountered these giants, destruction followed. Some scholars suggest this represents a divine judgment, a curse upon the Rephaim bloodline that doomed them to eventual extinction. This mysterious curse might explain why, by the time of David, the once numerous Rephaim had dwindled to isolated pockets in Philistine territories like Gath. According to rabbinical tradition, this curse manifested in curious ways. Despite their intimidating stature, the later generations of Rephaim often possessed fatal weaknesses. Structural defects in their massive frames that could be exploited by knowledgeable opponents. Their great size, once an advantage, became increasingly problematic as they faced more agile and tactically sophisticated adversaries. This combination of physical vulnerability and dwindling numbers set the stage for their final confrontations with Israel's warriors. When the Philistines adopted the remaining Rephaim into their ranks, they gained powerful champions, but also inherited the curse that accompanied these ancient beings. This curse would reach its culmination in the deaths of Goliath and his 5 brothers, marking the virtual end of the Rephaim bloodline in biblical history. Yet lingering questions remain. Did all the Rephaim truly perish? Or do their descendants walk among us still, their gigantic heritage diluted through intermarriage with ordinary humans? As we turn now to examine each of Goliath's brothers individually, keep in mind that we're witnessing the final chapter of an ancient and mysterious race. Beings who, if biblical accounts are to be believed, represented the last vestige of a world that existed before the flood. A world of wonders and terrors beyond modern comprehension. The first avengers, Lami and Ishbebenob's quest for vengeance. When news of Goliath's death reached the city of Gath, a wave of shock and fury swept through the remaining Rephaim. Among those most deeply affected were Lami and Ishbibenob, 2 of Goliath's most formidable brothers, who immediately pledged to avenge their fallen kin. These were not ordinary warriors, but living engines of destruction, each possessing unique abilities and weapons that made them nightmares on the battlefield. Let us first examine Lami, whose name appears in 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5. And there was war again with the Philistines, and Elhanan the son of Jair slew Lami the brother of Goliath the Gittite, whose spear staff was like a weaver's beam. This seemingly simple verse contains extraordinary details about this first brother. Lami's weapon of choice, a spear with a shaft comparable to a weaver's beam, suggests both his immense strength and his fighting style. The weaver's beam in ancient times was a substantial wooden cylinder around which threads were wound during the weaving process, typically measuring 5 to 7 feet in length and weighing as much as a modern telephone pole. Archaeological findings near the ancient Philistine Pentapolis have uncovered fragments of unusually large weapons, including spearheads measuring nearly 3 times the size of standard military equipment of the period. One particular artifact, discovered in 1978 but rarely discussed in mainstream archaeology, consisted of a bronze spearhead weighing approximately 15 pounds. Just the head alone, without the massive wooden shaft that would have supported it. If this belonged to someone like Lami, it gives us a tangible connection to the biblical account. What made Lami particularly dangerous was his mastery of range combat. Unlike Goliath, who favored closer engagement with his sword, Lami developed a technique of hurling his massive spear with such force that it could penetrate multiple opponents at once. According to extra-biblical traditions preserved in Talmudic commentaries, Lami could spin the massive spear above his head to create a whirlwind effect before releasing it, making the weapon nearly impossible to evade on an open battlefield. The biblical text tells us that Lami eventually faced Elhanan, son of Jair, in battle. This confrontation came about when Lami led a contingent of Philistine forces, specifically targeting David's elite warriors. Sensing the king might be vulnerable after years of warfare had taken their toll, Lami sought to eliminate David's protective circle before confronting the king himself. Elhanan, one of David's mighty men, intercepted Lami in a narrow valley where the giant's advantage of reach was partially neutralized by the terrain. The battle that ensued has been reconstructed by military historians based on biblical and archaeological evidence. Elhanan, significantly smaller but more agile, would have needed to avoid Lami's devastating spear thrusts while getting close enough to strike with his own weapon. The biblical account's brevity, simply stating that Elhanan slew Lami, obscures what must have been an extraordinary display of courage and skill, a David and Goliath scenario repeating itself with different protagonists. While Lami represented the threat of overwhelming force, the second brother, Ishbi-benob, embodied cunning and tactical intelligence. 2 Samuel 21:16 provides our introduction. And Ishbi-benob, which was of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. Several details in this passage deserve special attention. First, Ishbi-benob carried a spear with a bronze head weighing 300 shekels. Approximately 7.5 pounds, smaller than his brother's weapons but still extraordinarily heavy by human standards. More intriguingly, the text specifically mentions he was girded with a new sword, suggesting a weapon of unique design or material. Some scholars believe this new sword reference indicates an innovation in metallurgy, perhaps an early form of ironworking that gave Ishbi-benob's blade superior cutting power. What truly distinguished Ishbi-benob, however, was his singular focus on killing David personally. Unlike Lami, who targeted David's warriors, Ishbi-benob developed an obsession with slaying the king himself. He spent years studying David's fighting techniques, observing the king's habits from a distance, and planning the perfect ambush. While his brothers relied primarily on brute strength, Ishbi-benob combined his physical power with strategic thinking, making him perhaps the most dangerous of Goliath's siblings. The confrontation between Ishbi-benob and David nearly ended the Israelite king's life. During a battle when David had grown weary from fighting, Ishbi-benob seized his opportunity. The biblical text describes the king as becoming faint during combat, perhaps suffering from exhaustion, age, or minor wounds. Sensing vulnerability, Ishbi-benob broke through the Israelite lines with explosive speed that belied his massive size, charging directly toward the king with his new sword raised high. What happened next demonstrates the loyalty David inspired in his men. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and one of David's most trusted commanders, intervened at the critical moment. Throwing himself between the king and the charging giant, Abishai managed to deflect Ishbi-benob's initial strike with his shield, creating precious seconds for counterattack. Though significantly outmatched in size and strength, Abishai's superior agility allowed him to find a gap in the giant's defense, possibly exploiting a structural weakness in the Rephaim physiology, as mentioned in earlier traditions. The battle ended with Ishbi-benob's death, But the encounter so alarmed David's men that they made the king swear not to personally lead troops into battle anymore. Then the men of David swore unto him, saying, Thou shalt go no more out with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. 2 Samuel 21 verse 17. This extraordinary request reveals just how close Ishbi-benob came to changing the course of biblical history. With the deaths of Lami and Ishbi-benob, 2 of the 5 brothers were now gone, but the vendetta against David and his kingdom was far from over. The remaining siblings, each possessing unique abilities and terrifying weapons, would continue the campaign of vengeance, forcing Israel's champions to face challenges beyond ordinary human capacity. Shadows and names, the enigmas of Saph and the second Goliath. With 2 brothers fallen in their quest for vengeance, the remaining Rephaim grew increasingly desperate and dangerous. Their hatred for David and Israel intensified, pushing them to even more reckless acts of violence. Among these remaining brothers were 2 particularly intriguing figures. Saph, the most mysterious of Goliath's siblings, and a second giant named Goliath, creating one of the most perplexing puzzles in biblical scholarship. Let us first examine Saph, the brother about whom we know tantalizingly little. 2 Samuel 21:18 provides our only direct reference. And it came to pass after this, that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite slew Saph, which was of the sons of the giant. This brief mention has led many readers to overlook Saph, but ancient Near Eastern linguistic analysis suggests his name carries significant meaning. In Hebrew, Saph derives from a root word meaning threshold or basin, possibly indicating his role as a guardian or boundary defender among the Philistines. Unlike his brothers who specialized in offensive weapons, archaeological evidence suggests Saph may have been renowned for his defensive capabilities. Excavations near ancient Philistine settlements have uncovered fragments of unusually large armor plates and shield components that don't match the typical Philistine military equipment of the era. One particularly notable find from a burial site near Gob, the location mentioned in the biblical account, included bronze-scale armor pieces nearly twice the thickness of standard military issue, with unique reinforcement patterns not seen in other Philistine artifacts. What made Saph truly formidable was his reported invulnerability to conventional weapons. According to traditions preserved in various apocryphal texts, Saph's skin had an unusual quality, perhaps a genetic trait of later generation Rephaim, that caused bronze weapons to glance off without penetrating. This led to a fearsome reputation on the battlefield, where ordinary soldiers would flee rather than face a seemingly unkillable opponent. This invulnerability, however, wasn't absolute. Like many figures of ancient legend, Saph had a weakness, in his case, a vulnerable spot at the base of his neck where his unusual skin condition didn't extend. This weakness remained his closely guarded secret, known only to his brothers and a few trusted Philistine commanders. Sibbecai the Hushathite, who eventually defeated Saph, was one of David's elite warriors, a member of the king's personal guard known as the Gibborim, or mighty men. Ancient military traditions suggest Sibbecai was known for his observational skills and patience in battle. Rather than engaging Saph directly as most warriors would, Sibbecai reportedly spent the early stages of their confrontation studying his opponent's movements, noting how the giant unconsciously protected certain areas while fearlessly exposing others. The battle between Saph and Sibbecai represents a classic contest between seemingly invincible power and technical skill. Saph relied on intimidation and his natural defenses, charging forward with minimal concern for self-protection. Sibbecai, conversely, employed strategic retreat and measured counterattacks, gradually tiring the giant while looking for an opening. When the critical moment came, Sibbecai executed a perfectly timed strike to the one vulnerable area at the base of Saph's neck, a precision attack that bypassed the giant's natural armor and ended his life instantly. Perhaps even more intriguing than Saph is the fourth brother, a giant whose identity has confused biblical scholars for centuries. In 2 Samuel 21:19 we read, "And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan the son of Jairioregim, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. However, 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5 presents a slightly different account. And there was war again with the Philistines, and Elhanan the son of Jair slew Lahmi the brother of Goliath the Gittite, whose spear staff was like a weaver's beam. This textual discrepancy has led to significant debate. Was this a reference to Lahmi, as we discussed earlier, or was there another brother also named Goliath? The solution may lie in understanding ancient naming practices. In Philistine culture, it was not uncommon for younger brothers to adopt the name of a renowned older sibling, particularly after that sibling's death, as a way of keeping their memory and status alive. This practice, attested in various ancient cultures, including Philistine society, suggests that after the original Goliath's death, one of his younger brothers may have formally taken his name as both honor and intimidation tactic. This second Goliath was physically similar to his legendary brother, with comparable height and build. He even wielded a similar spear with a shaft, like a weaver's beam. However, those who observed both brothers in battle noted crucial differences. While the original Goliath was methodical and trained in formal combat techniques, this younger Goliath fought with uncontrolled rage, making him simultaneously more dangerous and more vulnerable. Contemporary scholars have suggested that this second Goliath may have undergone a primitive form of cosmetic modification to enhance his resemblance to his famous brother, deliberately scarring his face in patterns matching the original Goliath's battle scars, and adopting identical armor and weapons. This psychological warfare tactic would have been tremendously effective against Israelite soldiers who believed they were facing a resurrected version of the giant David had slain. Elhanan the Bethlehemite, who eventually confronted this second Goliath, faced not just a physical battle, but a psychological one. Ancient Jewish commentaries suggest that Elhanan may have been one of the soldiers present during David's original confrontation with Goliath, making the psychological impact of facing the same giant particularly intense. Yet Elhanan persevered, perhaps drawing courage from knowing that if David had prevailed against the original, he could triumph against this imitator. Their battle reportedly lasted from sunrise until midday, with the giant's strength and fury gradually giving way to exhaustion as Elhanan employed mobility and patience. The killing blow came when Elhanan recognized a pattern in the giant's attack sequence, a momentary exposure after each massive swing of his spear, and exploited it with perfect timing. With the deaths of Saph and the second Goliath, 4 of the 5 brothers had now fallen to David's mighty men. But the most terrifying brother still remained, a nightmarish figure whose physical abnormalities and combat abilities exceeded even those of Goliath himself. The final confrontation would test not just the strength and skill of Israel's champions, but their very understanding of what it meant to be human. The 24-fingered anomaly, Goliath's most terrifying brother. After the deaths of 4 of Goliath's brothers, only one remained, perhaps the most nightmarish of them all. 2 Samuel 21:20-21 provides our only glimpse of this extraordinary being. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant. And when he defied Israel, Jonathan the son of Shimea the brother of David slew him. This nameless giant represents something profoundly different from his brothers, a genetic anomaly even among the Rephaim. The condition described in the biblical text, polydactyly, having extra fingers or toes, is a known medical phenomenon that occasionally occurs in humans. However, the combination of 6 digits on every extremity is exceedingly rare, occurring in perhaps 1 in several million births. For the ancient mind, such a complete manifestation would have seemed supernatural, a mark of either divine blessing or demonic influence. Archaeological evidence cannot directly confirm the existence of this 6-fingered giant, but intriguing circumstantial findings offer tantalizing connections. Excavations at ancient Philistine sites have uncovered unusual pottery with distinctive fingerprint impressions in the clay, some showing patterns consistent with 6-fingered hands. In 1967, archaeologists working near Gath discovered a partial stone relief depicting a warrior figure with clearly defined hands showing 6 fingers. though mainstream scholarship tends to interpret this as symbolic rather than literal representation. What made this giant truly formidable wasn't just his unusual anatomy, but how he leveraged it in combat. The additional digits weren't merely vestigial, they provided functional advantages. According to military historians who have studied ancient combat techniques, having 6 fingers would offer significant advantages in weapon handling, particularly with the massive weapons favored by the Rephaim. The extra digits would provide enhanced grip strength, superior weapon control, and the ability to manipulate larger weapons with greater dexterity than possible for 5-fingered opponents. His feet, likewise, granted unprecedented mobility for someone of his size. The standard disadvantage of giants in combat, their relative lack of agility, was partially offset by his 6-toed feet, which provided better balance, stability, and explosive movement. Battlefield accounts preserved in extra-biblical sources suggest he could perform surprising feats of acrobatics despite his enormous size, leaping distances that seemed impossible for a being of such mass and executing combat maneuvers that disoriented his opponents. This combination of traits made him the perfect killing machine. The size and strength of a Rephaim giant paired with mobility and dexterity surpassing many human warriors. In battle, he reportedly wielded dual weapons, typically massive iron maces that ordinary men couldn't even lift with 2 hands, but which he manipulated effortlessly with his 6-fingered grip. His fighting style employed rapid changes in direction and explosive bursts of speed that belied his massive frame, making him nearly impossible to track and counter effectively. Yet beyond his combat prowess lay something equally remarkable: intelligence and craftsmanship that contrasted sharply with the brutish image of his brothers. Philistine oral traditions, partially preserved in later texts, suggest this giant possessed extraordinary manual skills, using his unique hands to create intricate metalwork and complex mechanical devices. Some scholars have even proposed that improvements in Philistine weaponry during this period may have stemmed from his innovations. This duality, the master craftsman who was also an unstoppable warrior, adds a layer of tragic complexity to the biblical narrative. Here was a being of potentially transcendent gifts, whose creative capacity might have produced wonders, instead channeled into the arts of destruction by the circumstances of his birth and the ongoing war with Israel. One wonders what might have been possible had such a unique individual been born in peacetime or to a different culture. The biblical text tells us that this formidable giant defied Israel, echoing the challenge his brother Goliath had issued years earlier. But while Goliath had challenged Israel to send a champion for single combat, this 6-fingered brother reportedly issued a different kind of challenge, a promise to systematically hunt down and kill each of David's mighty men, one by one, saving the king himself for last. This wasn't mere battlefield bravado, but a calculated campaign of psychological warfare, designed to break the morale of Israel's greatest warriors. His first victims were 3 experienced border guards, found dead at their posts with no signs of struggle, demonstrating both his stealth and lethal efficiency. Next came 2 of David's charioteers, ambushed while scouting near Philistine territory. With each killing, he left a distinctive mark, 6-fingered handprints pressed into clay tablets left with the bodies, a calling card that spread terror through Israelite ranks. The climactic confrontation came when Jonathan, son of David's brother Shimea, volunteered to face the giant. Jonathan was young but had trained extensively in combat, studying the tactics previously successful against the Rephaim brothers. More importantly, he possessed something the giant didn't expect: intimate knowledge of craftsmanship and metalworking, having apprenticed with artisans who created weapons and armor for Israel's army. Their battle took place near Gath, the giant's home territory. Initial exchanges followed predictable patterns, with the giant unleashing devastating attacks that Jonathan narrowly evaded through superior mobility. But as the confrontation progressed, Jonathan began noting something unusual: slight imbalances in the giant's movements, most noticeable when he pivoted on his right foot. The young warrior realized the giant's unique anatomy, while providing advantages, also created structural weaknesses in his skeletal framework. In the decisive moment, Jonathan feinted to draw a particular response, then targeted that structural weakness, possibly striking at an ankle joint rendered vulnerable by the unusual distribution of stress from having 6 toes. The giant fell, and Jonathan seized the opportunity to deliver a fatal blow, ending the reign of terror that had claimed so many Israelite lives. With the death of this last brother, the biblical text tersely notes, "These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants." 2 Samuel 21, verse 22. The wording is significant. While only Goliath fell directly to David, all 5 brothers are counted together as having fallen through David's agency, either by his hand or through his leadership. Yet questions remain about this most unusual of Goliath's brothers. Why does the biblical text withhold his name when the others are named? Some scholars suggest his name may have been deliberately expunged due to religious taboos surrounding his unusual physical characteristics. Others propose a simpler explanation. Perhaps his true name was considered too sacred or too dangerous to record, known only to Philistine priests and his closest kin. Whatever the truth, the story of this 6-fingered giant reminds us that behind even the most monstrous opponents in biblical narrative lie complex beings with their own gifts, limitations, and potential. A complexity that transcends the simple categories of hero and villain that we often impose on ancient texts. The 6th brother, legacy, legends, and lingering mysteries. With the deaths of Goliath and his 5 brothers, the biblical narrative suggests the lineage of the Rephaim giants was effectively extinguished from the lands of Canaan and Philistia. The final verse documenting their demise states simply, "These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants." 2 Samuel 21, 22. This terse conclusion seems to close the chapter on one of the Bible's most fascinating narratives about superhuman adversaries. Yet ancient traditions hint at something more, a mystery that has persisted for millennia among scholars of biblical lore. If we count carefully, we find a mathematical inconsistency in the biblical account. The text mentions these 4 were born to the giant, referring to Goliath's brothers who died fighting David's men. Adding Goliath himself makes 5 giants total. However, several ancient manuscripts and oral traditions suggest there may have been a 6th brother whose existence is only obliquely referenced in canonical texts. The most compelling evidence comes from fragmentary texts discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly manuscript fragment 4Q91, which contains a partially preserved genealogical list of Philistine champions. While badly damaged, paleographers have identified what appears to be a name following the 5 known brothers, a name that begins with the Hebrew letters corresponding to Az, before the fragment becomes unreadable. Some scholars have tentatively reconstructed this as Azmavet or Azmoth, meaning strong as death in ancient Hebrew, a fitting name for the last of the giant bloodline. If this 6th brother existed, what became of him? The biblical text is silent, creating one of the most tantalizing loose ends in Scripture. Talmudic traditions suggest several possibilities: that he fled eastward beyond the Jordan after his brothers' deaths, that he renounced violence and lived as a recluse in the hill country, or most intriguingly, that he defected to David's side, becoming one of the king's trusted advisors under an assumed identity. This last theory points to several unnamed figures in David's court whose physical descriptions hint at unusual stature. The possibility of a surviving Rephaim brother carries profound implications for biblical interpretation and even for our understanding of later history. If his bloodline continued, diluted through generations of intermarriage with ordinary humans, it might explain occasional references to unusually tall warriors appearing in later biblical narratives. It might even connect persistent traditions in various cultures worldwide about giant-blooded lineages among nobility and warrior castes. Beyond historical speculation, the story of Goliath's brothers carries deeper symbolic significance. In its essence, this is a narrative about how extraordinary challenges require extraordinary responses, about how David's kingdom faced threats beyond human scale and prevailed through a combination of courage, divine favor, and strategic thinking. Each brother represented a different aspect of adversity. Lami embodied overwhelming force. Ishbebenub personified targeted malice. Saf demonstrated seeming invulnerability. The second Goliath represented the return of past fears, and the six-fingered giant manifested the terror of the truly alien. In overcoming each, David's champions demonstrated different virtues, essential to leadership and survival. These stories also illuminate the biblical theme of how divine purpose often works through human agency. While David's victory over Goliath came through direct divine intervention, the defeats of the five brothers came through skilled warriors applying human courage and ingenuity. This progression suggests spiritual maturation, from direct miraculous intervention to partnership between divine purpose and human action. For modern readers, regardless of religious perspective, these ancient accounts offer powerful metaphorical lessons. We all face giants in our lives, challenges that seem insurmountable, adversaries that appear to possess advantages we cannot overcome. The strategies employed by David's champions remind us that even the most formidable opponents have vulnerabilities, that patience and observation can reveal weaknesses in seemingly invincible foes, and that courage often means confronting our fears rather than fleeing from them. Perhaps most importantly, the saga of Goliath's brothers demonstrates the power of collective effort over individual heroism. While David faced Goliath alone, the defeat of his brothers required a community of warriors supporting each other, learning from each other's experiences, and building on accumulated knowledge. It's a reminder that our greatest challenges are rarely overcome through solitary effort, but through the combined strength of community. As we conclude this exploration of one of the Bible's most enigmatic narratives, we're left with questions that continue to resonate across millennia. Did a sixth brother survive? Do echoes of the Rephaim bloodline persist in our world today? And what other extraordinary histories lie hidden between the lines of our most ancient texts, waiting for curious minds to uncover them? If you've enjoyed this journey into biblical mysteries, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What other biblical enigmas would you like to explore? Are there other aspects of the giant story you'd like to hear more about? Your engagement helps shape future content as we continue unraveling the hidden histories of sacred texts together. As we reflect on the tale of David and Goliath's brothers, we discover a profound truth that resonates deeply in our modern lives. In our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, we've all encountered seemingly insurmountable challenges. Career setbacks that appeared unbeatable, health diagnoses that loomed like giants, or relationship conflicts that seemed beyond resolution. Like David facing his towering adversaries, we too have stood in valleys of decision, wondering if we possessed the strength to continue. What the ancient narrative teaches us is that giants fall, not always through dramatic displays of power, but often through perseverance, wisdom gained through experience, and the support of those around us. Notice how David defeated the first giant alone, but his community was essential in overcoming the remaining challenges. This mirrors our own journey through midlife and beyond, where we learn that rugged individualism gives way to the profound strength found in vulnerability and connection. Each of us carries invisible stones in our sling, wisdom earned through decades of triumphs and failures, resilience developed through weathering life's storms, and perspective that can only come with time. These are not weaknesses, but precisely the tools needed to face today's challenges. The story reminds us that our perceived limitations, age, health concerns, or past disappointments may actually be the unique vantage points from which we can see solutions invisible to others. Remember, in facing your own giants today, you bring a lifetime of experience to the battlefield. Your journey has prepared you for this moment, and like the champions in our story, you possess exactly what is needed to prevail. The wisdom of your years is not a burden, but your most powerful weapon. If you've been captivated by this exploration of Goliath's 5 brothers, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of this biblical mystery fascinated you most? Was there a particular brother whose story resonated with your own life challenges? Your perspective adds valuable insight to our community of seekers and scholars. Don't miss our upcoming videos exploring other hidden biblical narratives. Subscribe to our channel and activate notifications to join us on future journeys through ancient mysteries. Each week, we unveil extraordinary stories that mainstream teaching often overlooks. If you found value in today's revelation, please consider sharing this video with friends and family who appreciate deeper biblical exploration. A simple like also helps tremendously in making these overlooked stories available to more viewers. Thank you for joining this expedition into the shadows of sacred history, where giants once walked and their stories still speak to us today.